Hello, welcome back to the Giant Papist. This is the Gospel reading and reflection for Friday of the first week of Advent. The Gospel reading in question is Matthew chapter 5, verses 20 through 26. So, once again, to no one's surprise, the church is having us return back to Matthew's account of the Sermon on the Mount. However, much like I did in other places, just to get a fuller picture, I am going to back up to verse 17 because I think that might help us understand the context of the rest of the passage allotted for today's gospel. So, that being said, let us get to the reading. At that time, Jesus taught his disciples, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Whoever then relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But he who does them and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to the men of old, you shall not kill, and whoever kills shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother shall be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, shall be liable to the hell of fire. So, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Make friends quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out till you have paid the last penny." Just double checking, I was remembering when today's gospel reflection ended in terms of verses. All right, so I did. Thus endeth the lesson. All right, so let's get into it. First things first. Mentioned this before in previous reflection videos in this series, and we hear it from the words of Jesus himself. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Jesus teaches and understands himself to be the fulfillment of the law of Moses and the fulfillment of the prophets sent by God to ancient Israel. And this is what we as Christians still believe to this day. As my Ascension Press Bible notes in the footnotes, Jesus came to bring the old law, i.e., the law of Moses, to its natural fulfillment in the new law, while discarding what had become obsolete. And I see there's a reference to John chapter 4, verses 21. So let me double check over there to see if I can glean additional wisdom to share with you in this video. Okay, now this seems to be a reference to the episode in John's Gospel where he's speaking to the Samaritan woman at the well, and the reference quote is Jesus said to her, the woman, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain," referring to Mount Gerizim, which is where the Samaritans to this day still have their temple, "when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father." Ah, okay. So, as Christians, we would understand, as Catholics, we would understand that the fulfillment of the law Jesus is talking about is found in the church. And then he also addresses what became problems that St. Paul and the other apostles had to fight with, issues that we still kind of have here facing today, verses 18 through 19. "For truly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will be passed from the law until all is accomplished." So, in other words, just because Jesus has come to fulfill his divine mission by dying on the cross doesn't mean we can just immediately discard what we would recognize today as the Old Testament books. No. The law and the prophets still to this day serve a purpose. They've just been fulfilled and renewed as new wine is poured into new wineskins. And Jesus doubles down on this, that in his original audience and in today, if you find a Christian kind of relaxing, not really taking seriously one of the precepts of the law, or worse, disobeying them, and then teaching his fellow Christians and others to copy him in this behavior, then, if by the grace of God he has shown mercy and granted entrance into heaven, because, let's be clear, it is by God's grace and mercy that any of us after our death will enter heaven. Jesus states that such an individual, if he does the thing he does not, he's telling his disciples to not do, then he will have the lowest place in the totem pole, if you will. But he who does the opposite, he who still follows the law in its fulfillment and teaches others to do so, God will have high praise for that individual in heaven. But again, the idea of what I talked about in earlier videos, the idea of false piety versus actual piety, the piety needs to be genuine. Jesus makes this clear when he says, "Unless our righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, we will not enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, for his original hearers, the scribes and the Pharisees, they were understood to be the go-to examples. Scribes, Pharisees, like they were the experts of both the law and the prophets, as well as the oral traditions that they had kept, both good and bad. And Jesus is saying, he'll later clarify that, imitate what they teach, but not what they do. But, it's not just enough to do it at their level. He is challenging us in a truly virtuous way to do it even better than the scribes and Pharisees are doing it. And to explain what he means by he is fulfilling the law, this is when Jesus starts to go to different examples concerning the commandments and customs of the Jewish religion that Christianity is the fulfillment of. This is where we begin. to have it's not just enough to do this, you have to do this as well, that I talked about on the Ash Wednesday video. So, first, he goes to the fifth commandment, fifth for Catholics, sixth for Protestants, thou shalt not murder. So, a very basic level. You shall not kill, and whoever kills shall be liable to judgment. Note, Jesus isn't necessarily disagreeing with that statement on the surface. He is mentioning it principally to set the baseline of what was commonly understood among his hearers of the day. But then he shows that we need to honor the spirit and not just the letter of the law. He introduces additional stuff that we might not think about, that according to him, according to the second person of the Holy Trinity, who would know, since God is the author of the law, what else would be disobeying the commandment of not murdering? The whole idea of when is our anger leading to vice is essentially the purpose of this, of verses 21 through 26. So, if you're angry with your brother, you will be liable to judgment just as if you had killed somebody unjustly. If you unjustly insult your brother, and keep in mind this doesn't just mean biological or familial relations, this includes your fellow humans. You, they too will be liable to the council, the Sanhedrin. So again, unjust insults, liable to judgment. Whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. Now, the word that is commonly translated as you fool is a Greek transliteration of the Aramaic word raka, which in this context of what Jesus is speaking, because it can have another meaning as well, but in this context, when he's using the word raka, he's using it as it would have been used as an obscure term of abuse and insult, where, let me see my notes here, it was often, according to the Talmud, it usually translated to empty one, fool, or empty head. So essentially, to put it in a modern context, it's basically the equivalent of calling somebody a moron or a dumbass. And then the liable to the great hell of fire. Obviously, in a Christian context, when we think hell, we think of eternal separation from God after our deaths. And while that is one valid interpretation of it, I also want to point out that the term, the original word that was used here in the Greek was Gehenna, which was a real life location known to the listeners of Jesus's day. We actually know where on earth Gehenna, when it's not being used as a synonym for the afterlife of the unjust, at where it was located. It was part of the border between the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and during the days of the Solomon's temple before it was destroyed, it was where some of the wicked kings of the kingdom of Judah had committed child sacrifice by fire, and was therefore afterwards cursed by Jeremiah the prophet. So when Jesus is saying Gehenna, not only will his first century listeners familiar with Jewish history think of that unfortunate past occurrence in their history, hence the negative connotation, but they also would have understood the practice of Gehenna being used as a synonym for the location of the divine punishment for the wicked. So both occurrences, both interpretations of this line are valid because that's how Jesus's listeners would have understood it. And thus, he offers a teaching of restitution. If you are able to do so with your fellow human before you go to the altar to offer a gift, which in today's Christian context would be before you go to Mass to receive the Eucharist. If you're able to bury the hatchet with your fellow human, with your brother in Christ, do so. And then afterwards, go and worship God and receive Him in the Eucharist. And then he even states the importance of burying the hatchet, if you were able to, with your accuser when you were being sent to court, lest you be handed over to the judge, who hands you over to the guard, who places you in prison. Now, I could be wrong, or I could be incorrect in this interpretation, but I always understood this as perhaps pointing to the Christian belief in purgatory due to verse 26 when Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, you will never get out till you paid the last penny." So if I'm interpreting this correctly, and I'll grant that I might not be, even though I am not wrong about purgatory not being a historical Christian belief, you know, purgatory was believed pretty broadly by Jews and Christians until it started being doubted after the Protestant Reformation. I think Jesus might be hinting at purgatory here, since, being thrown into prison for failing to make peace with your accuser usually wouldn't expect the possibility of being let out of jail. So maybe what he's saying here is hinting at the Christian belief that before we're able to, be with God, with Him in heavenly beatitude, after He, by His grace and mercy, He allows us to do so, we have this biblical notion of first needing to be purified of any lingering attachments to worldly things that wouldn't be fitting for heaven. And such attachments, if I'm correct in interpreting it this way, would be quarrels with your fellow humans that you still need to make peace with. Right? That's my thoughts on this gospel passage at the moment, at least as I can think of at the top of my head, aside from the brief and obvious preparation I did with the terms of Raka and Gehenna, because I wanted to make sure I was getting it right. That being out of the way, I hope you'll like this video, subscribe to my tiny but growing YouTube channel, and comment your thoughts on the video, and I will see you till the next video, whether it be the next series in this Lenten Gospel Reflections or something unrelated as it occurs to me to do. So, hope you have a good day.